Picture this: a land where beauty meant blackened teeth, where strangers bathed naked together in giant tubs, and where your own waste was worth money. This isn't fantasy, it's Japan. 150 years ago, a world locked away from outsiders for centuries, suddenly revealed in all its strangeness. From samurai rituals to bizarre food habits, from bathhouses to superstitions that shaped daily life, today we journey deep into the curious and often shocking world of 19th century Japan. Get ready, because what you're about to discover will change the way you see history forever. 150 years ago, Japan stood at a crossroads. For over 2 centuries, the country had been locked away from the outside world under a policy called sakoku, meaning closed country. Foreigners were banned, trade was restricted, and Japanese society developed in isolation, following its own unique and often bizarre path. But in 1853, the arrival of American warships, known as the Black Ships, forced Japan to open its doors. Suddenly, the outside world poured in, bringing railroads, telegraphs, and Western fashions. The clash was astonishing. Imagine it. Samurai with swords walking past businessmen in bowler hats, peasants in straw sandals staring at foreigners in leather boots, tea houses serving miso soup right next to imported whiskey bottles. For Western visitors, Japan was like stepping into a dream or a nightmare. A country that was advanced and sophisticated, yet also deeply strange. Streets were meticulously clean, yet human waste was collected and sold as fertilizer. People lived by strict rules of politeness, yet carried weapons on their hips. It was a land of contradictions, a place where the past and future collided. To understand Japan's bizarre daily life, we must step into its streets, into its homes, into its bathhouses, its shrines, its markets, because in the details of daily life lies the strangest, most fascinating story of all. When it came to fashion, Japan 150 years ago was a world apart from anything the West had ever seen. What we consider bizarre was to them the height of beauty and respectability. Let's start with something truly shocking: black teeth. Women, especially married women and geisha, practiced a custom called ohaguro. They dyed their teeth black using a mixture of iron filings and vinegar, sometimes with powdered tea. Why? To them, white teeth looked animalistic, like the fangs of a beast. Blackened teeth symbolized maturity, elegance, and loyalty to one's husband. So, if you walked into a Japanese household in 1870 and saw a woman flashing a bright black smile, it meant she was considered refined, not frightening. Men had their own bizarre fashion too. The most famous was the chonma, the samurai hairstyle. The top of the head was shaved bald, while the sides and back were oiled and tied into a small bun. To Westerners, it looked odd, even comical. But in Japan, it symbolized discipline, status, and manhood. The bald patch wasn't just style, it helped samurai helmets fit snugly during battle. Over time, it became a proud marker of warrior class identity. And if you think that's strange, consider footwear. The streets of Edo were filled with the sound of gaita, wooden clogs raised on tall blocks, sometimes so high that women had to balance carefully just to walk. The higher the clog, the higher the status. Walking in them was like moving on stilts, awkward, noisy, but undeniably fashionable. Now let's talk about the most iconic garment of all, the kimono. Far from simple robes, kimonos were canvases of art, layered and dyed with intricate patterns that revealed a person's class, age, and even the season. For the elite, silk kimonos could cost more than a farmer's yearly income. Some women wore as many as 12 layers, each with symbolic colors carefully chosen. But not everyone had such luxury. The common people wore rough, simple robes made of hemp or cotton, patched and reused until they were threadbare. Fashion wasn't just clothing, it was identity. And perhaps the strangest accessory? Tiny pouches and small sword cases tied at the hip, since kimonos had no pockets. Men would carry medicine, tobacco, or even tiny nail clippers in decorative cases called inro, dangling from cords. Imagine formal Japanese men walking the streets with miniature boxes and charms jingling at their sides. And of course, for samurai, the ultimate accessory was the daisho, the two-sword set symbolizing their honor. Fashion in Japan wasn't just about looking good, it was about telling the world exactly who you were. To Western eyes, Japan's fashions in the 19th century seemed bizarre, even laughable. Black teeth, bald, top knots, walking on wooden stilts. But to the Japanese, these were powerful symbols of beauty, identity, and order. Fashion was not just clothing, it was tradition, stitched into every fold of fabric, pride worn in every step of a wooden clog. And as we'll soon see, if fashion was unusual, daily life itself was even stranger. Nowhere is daily life more revealing than at the dinner table, or in Japan's case, the tatami mat. Because 150 years ago, eating wasn't just about survival, it was about ritual, respect, and some very unusual habits. First, forget chairs. Meals were taken sitting directly on the floor, on woven straw mats called tatami. Food was placed on low trays, and everyone sat kneeling in the polite Caesar position. Imagine sitting this way for hours, legs tucked tightly beneath you, back straight. It was uncomfortable for foreigners, but to the Japanese, it was proper and respectful. And what about utensils? Chopsticks, of course, but with rules. You never stuck chopsticks upright in rice that resembled funeral offerings to the dead. Passing food from one chopstick to another was also taboo because it resembled funeral rituals with cremated bones. To Westerners, they looked like little sticks. To the Japanese, they were sacred tools of etiquette. Now let's talk about slurping. In the West, slurping your food is rude. But in Japan, 150 years ago, the louder you slurped your noodles, the more respect you showed the cook. It meant, "This is delicious." Imagine a whole tea house filled with people slurping at once, like a chorus of noodles. And what did they eat? Rice was the foundation of every meal, so important that it wasn't just food. It was currency. Wealth wasn't measured in coins, but in rice production. Samurai were paid in rice stipends, taxes were collected in rice. Without rice, life simply stopped. But rice alone wasn't enough. Meals were balanced with miso soup, pickled vegetables, and seasonal fish. Meat, however, was rare. For centuries, eating four-legged animals was discouraged by Buddhist influence. So protein often came from the sea: fish, squid, octopus, and even seaweed. This seafood-based diet gave Japan its reputation for longevity, but it also shocked foreigners unused to dried sardines for breakfast. And here's a twist: sushi. Today, sushi is luxury cuisine, but 150 years ago, it was street food, the fast food of Edo. Imagine grabbing a quick sushi snack from a stall before heading home. It was cheap, quick, and filling, nothing like the high-priced delicacy we see today. And if you think Western table manners were strict, Japan had its own unique quirks. Bow before eating, bow after finishing, and say "itadakimasu" before your first bite. Literally, "I humbly receive." This wasn't just politeness, it was gratitude to the farmer, the cook, and even the life of the fish or vegetable you were about to consume. Meals weren't rushed either. Eating was slow, mindful, and communal. Food connected not just the body, but the spirit. So if you visited Japan 150 years ago, You'd find yourself kneeling on the floor, fumbling with chopsticks, slurping noodles loudly, and eating things you'd never seen before. And while you might think it bizarre, the Japanese would probably look at you, struggling with your fork and knife, and think, now that's strange. In 19th century Japan, daily life was filled with contradictions. At the top of the social hierarchy stood the samurai, noble warriors bound by the code of Bushido. At the bottom were laborers, who collected something far less glamorous: human waste. Two lives, worlds apart, yet both essential to the strange rhythm of Japan. The samurai were not merely soldiers, they were symbols of discipline, honor, and control. Their swords, the katana and wakizashi, were extensions of their soul. Every gesture, from how they bowed to how they tied their robes, was guided by ritual. To be samurai was to live a life of constant readiness, prepared to fight, to serve, or even to die. And if honor was lost, death by seppuku, ritual suicide, was considered nobler than living in shame. It was a life outsiders found both fascinating and terrifying. And then there were the men at the very bottom of society, the night soil collectors. Their job? To go from house to house collecting buckets of human waste. In a world without sewage systems, these men were indispensable. But here's the bizarre part. Waste wasn't just thrown away, it was valuable. Farmers bought it, using it to fertilize their rice fields. Rich families' waste was even worth more, since their diets were better and produced, well, higher quality fertilizer. In fact, landlords sometimes negotiated waste rights with tenants, deciding who got to keep the, shall we say, profits. Two extremes of daily life, yet both essential. The samurai embodied Japan's ideals of discipline and duty. The waste collectors embodied its practicality and resourcefulness. Together, they reveal a society where even the most bizarre contrasts coexisted naturally. To the outside world, this seems strange, even shocking. But in Japan, it was balance. Honor at the top, fertility at the bottom. Both part of a system that kept the nation running. So, the next time you imagine samurai with gleaming swords, remember, just down the street, someone was carrying buckets of waste that would grow the rice the samurai depended on. Prestige and practicality, dignity and dirt. Such was the bizarre daily life of Japan 150 years ago. In 19th century Japan, life wasn't all work and duty. Entertainment was everywhere, loud, strange, and utterly captivating, from colossal wrestlers to demon-shaped kites, from puppet shows that made grown men weep to games of chance in smoky tea houses. Japan's amusements were as bizarre as they were beloved. First, sumo. Today, it's Japan's national sport. But 150 years ago, it was more than a game. It was ritual. Matches began with sacred gestures, wrestlers purifying the ring with salt, stomping to drive away evil spirits. Each movement had spiritual meaning, rooted in Shinto tradition. For the crowd, it was spectacle. The strength, the sweat, the raw power, it was thrilling. For the wrestlers, it was sacred. They weren't just athletes, they were guardians of tradition. Then there was bunraku, puppet theater unlike anything in the world. These weren't toys for children. Each puppet could be 3 feet tall, operated by 3 men in perfect harmony, one for the head and right hand, one for the left hand, and one for the feet. Stories of love, betrayal, and honor unfolded on stage with heartbreaking realism. Narrators recited lines with booming voices, while shamisen musicians plucked sorrowful notes. Entire crowds wept over the fate of wooden dolls. To outsiders, it was baffling. To the Japanese, it was art that touched the soul. Kabuki was the louder, wilder cousin of bunraku. Bright costumes, exaggerated makeup, wild gestures, the stage was a carnival of color and noise. Actors froze in poses called mie, holding them until the crowd erupted in applause. Foreigners found kabuki chaotic, even strange, but for the Japanese, it was irresistible. Part drama, part dance, part concert, all rolled into one unforgettable night.